All right, guys, so this is our first video, and we are going to talk about what is a virus. Really, we're going to talk about the Spanish flu, but before we get into that later this week, we need to lay some groundwork and talk about viruses. So a virus is a microbe. Other examples of microbes are fungi, maybe like a mushroom or athlete's foot. We also have bacteria. Bacteria like salmonella that can also make you sick. We have protozoa, which is slightly similar form. We won't really get into that, but they have a nucleus and kind of do their own thing in some ways. Anyways, what are examples of a virus? I'm going to give you a second, or you can pause the video and think of some examples on your own. Okay. An example of the virus might be the flu. Not the fly. The flu. Maybe the common colds, right? What about rabies? Or smallpox? What about cold sores or herpes? So, knowing that, after brainstorming a little bit, you can see that there's a lot of types of viruses that we interact with on a pretty daily basis. Before we dive further into viruses, let's establish traits of a living thing, because viruses are kind of in this weird, itchy gray area. They're not really living, they're not really not living. So the traits that define a living thing are these. Living things are composed of one or more cells. Living things produce and use energy. So as I'm writing these points out, think of examples that you might be able to attach to each characteristic. So for example, number 2, producing and using energy. How do you use energy? Well, we're using energy right now, right? We're talking, we're awake, we're sitting upright. Okay? Number 3, living things grow. We start out as babies, then we turn into toddlers, and then someday we become adults. We don't stay as our original form, just like a plant or like a dog. We grow. Number 4, living things respond to stimuli. If I am sitting here and my brother pokes me with a really hot stick, then I'm going to respond by that stimuli, by that sensation, and I'm going to move my hand away. That's an example of that. Number 5, living things adapt. You change based on stressors or different factors in your environment. That's what adapting is. You change over generations based on a lot of different factors that we're not going to go into, but we adapt, and actually so do viruses. You'll find more about that. Number 6, living things can reproduce. That means they can make copies of themselves. Okay, so viruses, though, are in this middle ground like we kind of discussed. Viruses have internal machinery that allows them to metabolize and reproduce, but they need a host in order to do this. A host could be like an animal, it could be a human, it could be an animal, and then the virus could adapt or evolve, and then the host could be a human. The virus, in order to use its internal machinery, in order to metabolize and reproduce, to make copies of itself, they have to hijack the host cell of whatever they've attached themselves to. They need to use the genetic material from that host in order to use the genetic material that they have, and then they can make copies of themselves. So it's sort of like a cool, creepy, mean thing for a virus to do, but it also makes them extremely versatile, it makes them adaptable, and it makes them a little scary. Some viruses can manipulate their host gene's expression. So, for example, if you get a cold sore when you're a kid, that virus you are now a host for that virus, and you might even continue to get cold sores because that virus, even though you're not actively having a cold sore all the time, it's in your body and it's manipulated your DNA. So that virus is with you maybe forever. And that's kind of a crazy thought. So knowing now what we know about viruses, guys, which of their traits and characteristics make them especially scary? We talked about adaptability. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the speed at which they can adapt. You can look into that if you want. And think of how they can move from host to host based on their ability to adapt. So I'll leave you with that.